So we are almost finished. We are going to be finishing the mimer, the discourse on not hating another Jew and loving our fellow Jew. So this is going to be the final class, although we always get into some pretty amazing discussions. So who knows? It may not. All right. I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So we've been talking about, the last thing that this mimer has been about is the idea, again, answering the question of why is it that this is the entire Torah? What Hillel told the would-be convert, this is Zehu Kol HaTorah Kula. This is the entire Torah, and the rest is commentary. And basically what we explained was this amazing explanation of what mitzvot are altogether on a mystical level. Every mitzvah is an idea of a yichud. A yichud means we are coming to unify. As the way God brought about existence, he allowed his self to become manifest in a way where, shall we say, where he's not manifest at all. In this world where we do not see, we do not perceive God, and there's a split in the perception of God. So there's God above, the way that God is in the heavens, and then there is the way that God is here on earth, which is not right in terms of our perception. In fact, Avram Avinu, when referring to his time in Ur Kasdim, he referred to God as the God of heavens, but not the God of earth. And later on, he refers to him as the God of the heaven and the God of earth. Why the difference? So our rabbis explained the simple difference, that when he was in Babylonia and Ur Kasdim, God was not known on earth. And so he was the God of the heavens, but not the God on earth. In other words, our coming to know and perceiving God is itself, we make God real in this world. Not that we're actually God real, obviously, but the fact that God is perceived, this becomes the reality of God. So this idea that down here we don't know God and up here God is known, down here is the place where God's Shekhinah is best, the divine presence. And thus there is a split between God himself, so to speak, what's called Kudsha Brichu, and Shechinte, God's presence, the way God becomes manifest. And when we do a mitzvah, we are creating a yichud. We are creating a unity, because now God is becoming known in this particular place. So when we do a mitzvah of keeping Shabbat, that is a great, wondrous yichud where God is now known on earth, because we are actually refraining from certain activities and doing certain activities to sanctify this day, so that in the expression of the mitzvah, God becomes known. Through the expression of the mitzvah, God becomes known. And so God above and God below, so to speak, become united. They become one. Now, the Rebbe explained that which mitzvah accomplishes this unity more than anything else. This is the mitzvah of loving your fellows. We'll see in the blue area where we left off last week. This is accomplished through the performance of the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself, as explained above. All other mitzvahs are like a commentary that explain this unity. Wow, so we have here an amazing explanation of what this means, that loving your fellow is not that it's tantamount to all of the mitzvot, but really what all mitzvot are about is creating this unity in God himself. Thus, Ahavas Yisrael represents the ultimate purpose of the Torah. Each of the other mitzvos expresses that purpose in an individual manner, as the Tzemach Tzedek proceeds to explain. So every mitzvah is going to be an aspect of that yichud, an aspect of that coming together. Whereas loving your fellow Jew and accepting upon yourself and having an all-encompassing Ahavat Yisrael, we're going to see that accomplishes the unity in a much more inclusive, pervasive, and collective kind of a way. So now, in the words of the Tzemach Tzedek, so that is, they establish the form through which this unity will be expressed. So, for example, the Rebbe gives a down-to-earth analogy. Through Torah study, man's wisdom is united with God's wisdom. Well, how do you like that? We usually don't think about studying Torah in such a way. But really, when we're talking about the study of Torah, what we mean is we're talking about this is the divine wisdom. And when we study, our wisdom becomes united with God's wisdom. That's what's happening when we're studying Torah. So that's an aspect of God, meaning the way that God becomes manifest through his intellect, through his Chabad. Similarly, our love is united with his love, and so too we connect all of our other emotional attributes to the corresponding emotive attributes of God through the performance of other mitzvos. So to illustrate by way of analogy, when a person clings to and connects powerfully with another person, the cause of the attachment is authentic love. So the Rebbe now brings the analogy of having when you have a friendship, but not just a friendship, we're not talking about, I got a lot of friends. We're talking about a real friendship where two people really become united. They become where the two people love each other in such a way they're willing to do anything for each other, right? So when a person clings to and connects powerfully with another person, so the cause of the attachment is authentic love. The oneness between them is then expressed in various forms. Sometimes in speech, conversing, maybe they'll converse words of wisdom with each other, right? They'll talk Torah, they'll talk different, they'll have a discussion. So you can go and take a look at those people, and somebody who may not realize looks and says, this is an intellectual debate, and we don't necessarily know that they're friends. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, maybe they're close friends. But in truth, these two people having this discussion, it's not just a discussion of the mind, but this discussion becomes the format through which their hearts become one. And then there are times of emotion where they display love for one another. And at times it happens in action, doing favors with physical things. And, in other words, that would be like the two positive mitzvot are the 248 limbs of the king. So this is an idea that's brought in the Zohar, that every mitzvah, every positive mitzvah is an aspect of God in this world. They are the 248 positive commandments, are the 248 limbs of the king. So just like if I have a friend and let's say the friend needs a lift to the airport, right? So a true friend is going to help him out. He's going to drive him to the airport. He's going to do an action for him. Or maybe he needs Shabbos made. Or maybe he needs something else. Maybe he needs a loan. Maybe he needs whatever all of the various acts are. Well, in the case of connecting, the idea here is that all of the mitzvot, again, let's, keep the through line here of what the Tzemach Tzedek is explaining, is that every mitzvah is an aspect of this unifying of God. So each mitzvah brings about a dimension of unity, associated with a particular organ to which the mitzvah corresponds, and all other attributes are contained within it. Okay, he's going to explain that soon with the mitzvah, but it's a very beautiful idea. So you have two people. The two people love each other, have the love. They have this absolute love, this absolute connection with each other. That love may become manifest again, let's say in a discussion. They're having a lively debate or discussion about some matter of intellect, right? So all other aspects of their unity are now contained within this discussion. But the actual vessel for that unity happens to be the discussion they're having at this point. And the Rebbe is going to explain this soon with the mitzvahs. So that is, the unity establishes a particular aspect in man. So that is, the unity established between a particular aspect in man and its counterpart in God, when he performs each particular mitzvah, reflects in microcosm the complete and all-encompassing unity between God and the Jewish people. So the person may be doing one particular mitzvah, but that one particular mitzvah really, it stands for all of the mitzvot. It stands for the whole connection between God and the Jewish people. Similar concepts apply with regard to all mitzvahs. So the Rebbe is now going to go into specific mitzvahs and talk about what they mean and how the oneness is, an aspect of the oneness becomes manifest through that particular mitzvah. And hopefully the idea will become clearer here. So similar concepts apply with regard to all the mitzvahs. For example, the mitzvah of wrapping oneself in the talis is identified with the charge, accept upon yourself a king. So I don't know if you've heard this idea before. It's brought in Chassidus. It's most famously, I think, in chapter 41 in Tanya, but it's taken from other places in Kabbalistic works. So in the morning, there's a mitzvah incumbent upon men that we take a talis, we take a talit, we all know, and we put it over ourselves, right? And there are a couple of different ideas going on here that the Rebbe is going to be explaining. So one of the ideas here is that, there's a mitzvah in the Torah. It says another mitzvah in the Torah, Som tasim alecha melech, that you shall place a king upon yourself. The Jewish people are meant to have a king. Now, practically, how did we achieve that mitzvah? The first time we achieved that mitzvah was when we appointed and anointed Saul. So Saul was the first Jewish king, and that was actually fulfilling a mitzvah that we would accept a king. But now there's a spiritual idea behind this, and that is that when we put on the talis, we're putting the talis over us, which means that we are accepting God's authority upon us. There's an actual physical garment that we're putting on, and what that stands for is actually putting on God's authority upon us. And the Kabbalah describes two different types of light. Two different types of light that we draw down through performing different mitzvot. And some mitzvot represent one type, some mitzvot represent another type, but I want to see if we have this at all in my diagram. It's not going to be so clear from the diagram, so I'm not going to share it. But perhaps you've heard of the idea of Sovev Kol Almin and Mimale Kol Almin. For those who have studied Chassidus, you'll understand it. If you haven't, well, we're studying Chassidus, so let me explain it to the best of my ability. Because without understanding it, we're not going to understand the next piece. So, but this is a very fundamental idea in Chassidic thought, and that is It's very beautiful, a very elegant idea. And that is that in bringing about existence, there is, I'm going to start with the light that we can understand. So if we have an object, so that object needs to receive a divine light that is matching and fitting exactly to what that object is. So my hand has to receive a divine light that's going to match my hand. Just like if I want to put on a glove, right? The glove has to have a fit and match my hand. The energizing force, or, you know, a very good analogy today, you have different power connectors, you know, for your laptop and for your cell phone and for your, you know, now they try to make them as universal as possible, but, 10, 15 years ago, like every company had their own type and every device is going to have its own little cord to go in. All of that has to do with the type of energy, the amount of energy that has to go into the machine. And does only energy have to go into the machine, or does information also have to go into the machine, telling it certain things? All I'm bringing out here is that when we're talking about an energy that brings something about, the energy that brings about this hand that you see here, is it going to be specific to this hand? The answer is yes. That light is called the light that fills all worlds, Memale Kol Almin. The light that fills all worlds. So Alpha Centauri, or the biggest star out there. One of my students told me that there's a name. There's like a scientific name for they found the largest star. I don't remember what it's called. But you have some very large items out there, not even going into the galaxies. But everything has a specific divine light that goes into it, going all the way down to the microscopic, down to the subatomic particles. Everything is going to have the exact divine energy that it needs to be exactly what it is. And it's going to be, so to speak, formed specifically according to the vessel, according to the item, the thing that it is creating. Is that clear, more or less? So if I'm an artist, I'm going to have a paint stroke, and it's going to be a specific color, a specific dimension. It's going to be a particular stroke that's going to create exactly what it is that I want to create. And all of the paint strokes together are going to create, in a very, very specific way, the piece of art that I want to create. How much more so a hand? The hand has got, many, many more things going on in it.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I wanted to ask, we are always told that we need an empty vessel for the light. Otherwise, we cannot receive the light. But now you say the light is measured and preordained by Hashem.
Right.
Does it depend what size vessel we have too?
Right.
Or doesn't it?
Good question. I think that we're talking about two different things. Okay, when we're talking about the idea that we need to be an empty vessel, we're talking about the light that a human consciousness receives to have a relationship with God. And that's a very specific type of a light that's going to be different than the creative force of God. So what if a person never has a relationship with God? Are they going to all of a sudden not have hands and not have legs and not have a physical? No. There's a certain creative force of God for the entire universe that is not going to depend upon our relationship with God. What you're talking about is the light of God that we can actually feel through our relationship with God. Okay? So
not the creative.
Not the creative light,
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Not the Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz kind of light.
Yeah.
Light of me feeling a relationship with God, well, I have to be open to receive. I have to be an empty vessel.
Okay.
So So in this creative force, we have the light that's called Mimali Kol Almin. Now, this could be understood. The idea of this light that fills could be understood even maybe on a scientific level. And as I've shared in my talk on my book, I have the 4 keys of Kabbalah, and the first key is that everything that exists has a spark of God inside of it, and I explained that with at the very least, by way of analogy, from a professor, Jonathan Wheeler, who says he has a theory. It's called it by bit, meaning that any it that exists has to have a bit of information within it, telling it what it is and how it functions with the world around it. It says that if we take anything away from technology, it's it from bit, that everything that exists has to have some information inside of it. And he doesn't say what it is. He says, if you know what that information is, boy, you're blessed. You better cherish that. And possibly he could have even been referring to this Kabbalistic idea that every single part of existence has a very specific formulation of divine light within it to bring it about. The greatest galaxy to the smallest subatomic particle, each one very specific. And science could understand it. Even Aristotle believed in a prime mover. So Aristotle believed that there was a prime mover, meaning that all of the all of the planets, all of the worlds, everything that he had perceived in his understanding, everything is moving around about. And anything that is moved has to have something that is moving it. And he called that the prime mover. Now, in his philosophy, he said that basically we can have no relationship with the prime mover. And that, of course, is a big diversion from Judaism, right? So we're not going there. But the idea that there is, and every atom is moving, right? Everything has to be moving. What if everything would stop moving, right? It would stop existing. That's the fact of an atom. It's not just, it would be a non-moving atom. It would cease to exist as an atom. So it's only the movement that creates the reality of the atoms and thus of everything that exists in the universe. This is all part of what we call the light that fills all worlds. And you could even, as I said, it could be understood in a scientific kind of a way. Although, of course, we're going here beyond the scientific, saying that there's divine light going in, bringing it about. But it could be understood even on a scientific level. But then we have something entirely beyond that. So here's the thing. Everything also has what is called the Sovev Kol Almin, the encompassing light. So there is an encompassing light that encompasses not just everything on planet Earth, not just everything in our solar system, not just everything in our galaxy, but the entire universe and the entire spiritual. There are many spiritual universes as well, and spiritual layers. Everything is encompassed by what is called the Sovev. This is more associated with God's infinite light. And we're not going to totally understand this today. I don't totally understand it altogether, but just to the best of my ability, I'm going to give you a few words to hopefully help us understand this. And that is that God himself is infinite and beyond, no dimension whatsoever. And in the whole order of creation, God brings about creation in a way that it can make some sensibility to us. The whole Kabbalistic evolution and explanation of how everything comes about is put forth in a way that we can understand it, we can get it. Because if it makes no sense, if it has no cohesive sense, then there's no point to it, right? We could just say, well, God snapped his fingers. Of course, he doesn't have fingers, but you understand what I mean. God snapped his fingers and there was a world. But even in the story of creation, we don't say that, do we? We say first God made this and then he made that, and you have all of the Midrashic interpretations. Then you have the Kabbalistic interpretation. that there's a whole spiritual process going on here. So here's the point. How can you go from the infinite beyond measure, beyond any measure whatsoever, to a measured amount of light according to each thing, according to its capacity? So perhaps the real answer is you can't, but God did. And in explaining how God did, what Kabbalah explains is that there is this encompassing light that becomes the intermediary between God's infinitude and the finitude of the energy that comes into everything in a specific way. We'll have to discuss all of this in a much, giving it much more attention at another time. And if you've heard these concepts before, now you'll understand them a little bit better. If you're hearing them for the first time, they might be a little confusing, and that's okay. But let's just put it this way. Yes, Bastian.
So Vev is still not the light that comes into us.
Man? I didn't understand what you said.
The Sovev light is not the light that is actually going into our vessel, right?
It's not, well, you know, let's put it this way. It is and it isn't. Are radio waves going into my hand? Yes.
Probably through your hand.
Through my hand, exactly, right? So Sovev is here, it's in this world, but it's not received by the world. That's the point that I'm saying. Yeah. So when we say it doesn't go into, well, it does and it doesn't. It goes in it and through it, like the radio wave, right? Because our capacity is not one that can contain it. We don't have receivers to receive the infinite, but we draw the infinite. And this is one of the most amazing teachings in Chassidic philosophy is that mitzvot, in a general sense, we draw the infinite light, which cannot be accomplished in the highest spiritual worlds. But there are some mitzvot, I'll get you in a second. There are some mitzvot that represent the encompassing light more than others. We'll discuss in a moment. Anna, please.
Just to simplify the process, there are actually two different, let's consider it tools or energies. One energy is the production, something that creation was used to make things, to do things in existence. And the second type of energy and light is much more, human, a combination between feelings between human, spiritual energy and connection with God. Because other creations we can only dissect and understand, like a scientist who really try to understand the process. But one that is beyond probably our ability to understand and to analyze is something that is created by following the rules of Torah, because that's something that is like, it's an energy that is almost impossible for us to understand. Why is it? Unless we know much more about our own abilities to connect. Sure. In simple way, materialistic way of doing it. This is the creation of tools and animals and plants and everything, which definitely has energy, has light, has very nice purpose. But the second one, the purpose is something that is much more in our spirit, in our neshama. It's something that is almost impossible to understand unless you follow the mitzvahs that are designed. Am I right or not?
I think there's a profound truth in what you're saying. I think maybe we could understand it by way of analogy of a family, right? So, you could say, all right, well, here's the father, in the old-fashioned home. Here's the father. He's going to work to earn the money to be able to pay all the bills. Here's the mother. She's keeping the house clean, and they're raising another generation of people that will continue and do this in perpetuity. It's the propagation of the species. So they're going to continue. They're going to end up growing up and doing this, continuing and having homes, right? So, and this is, again, very much along the lines of evolution, right? That everything evolves to be able to take care of the system. And one thing is missing, one very important thing that's missing, and that is love.
Yeah, that's exactly what I understand, that it's a different type of energy.
Right, it's a different type of energy, and it's not, it's not quid pro quo, it's not cause and effect in the same kind of a way, it's more all-encompassing.
Okay.
Right, because love sometimes is going to manifest that I love you when you're doing everything I say, and I love you even more profoundly when you go against what I say. Sometimes, there's that level of love. So that's a good, either an analogy or it might be akin to this as well. When we're talking about the way that the all-encompassing light of God is definitely akin to this idea of, I would say the all-encompassing love that God has. And that is connected to the idea of God's infinitude. But I wouldn't quite define it that way, because even love has its definitions. And I think we're talking about something maybe even more profound than that. But at least it's a good way to get us started understanding in that direction. So when we do certain mitzvot are physically encompassing mitzvot. So give me an example of a mitzvah that is encompassing. I can think of 3 offhand. Maybe you can think of others. Something that physically...
Probably respect your parents. I would assume that this is one.
Okay, well, respecting your parents is a, let me give you an example of what I mean, okay? Because here he's talking here about the mitzvah of putting on a talis, right? When you put on a talis, it is physically encompassing you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Actual mitzvah, when we put on the talis, we say the blessing, and then we wrap ourselves in the talis. So, I guess we're the candy, and the talis is the wrapper. We are literally wrapping ourselves in the talis, and that is the blessing that we say in the mitzvah that we fulfill. Is not just putting a shawl over our shoulders. No, it's actually wrapping ourselves inside of the talis. So that is physically encompassing us. You don't need a diagram for that, right? That's if you take a big shawl, right, and you go and you wrap yourself in it, now it is encompassing you. I can think of a few other mitzvot that are encompassing in that kind of a way. Perhaps somebody else can... that surrounds you, right? A mitzvah that surrounds you. Sukkah, right? Very good. So the sukkah, we go and we sit inside of the sukkah, and the sukkah is specifically something that surrounds you, right? So it's connected to that encompassing energy, the sovev. Mikveh, very good. Another one, right? You have to be encompassed. You have to be by the waters of the mikveh for it to do its thing. If you're out or you're sitting down or putting your toes in the mikveh, doesn't do its mikveh thing. You have to be totally, entirely enveloped within it, right? There are other mitzvot that are similar to this, and every mitzvah really has. Please.
I was going to say, for men, putting it on the tefillin.
Right. So interesting. Kabbalah defines tefillin very much as the memale, not as encompassing, because it's going on one aspect of you in a particular fashion. It's going on your left arm and on a place in your head. So that's considered Kabbalistic, although I hear what you're saying, because you're wrapping yourself in it, you're tying yourself with it. But nevertheless, Kabbalah calls that a mitzvah that is memale. And you need both types of mitzvot, because we need to draw both energies for a solid connection. Maybe the mitzvah of mezuzah in a sense, because you need to have a dwelling upon which you place it. But even that is considered a more memale, the light that fills kind of a mitzvah. But now, some of the mitzvot, which are these all-encompassing mitzvot, let's return and see what the Rebbe says about the mitzvah of tefillin and how he describes it, and we'll hopefully have a better appreciation. So similar, we'll start from this paragraph, similar concepts. So similar concepts apply with regards to all other mitzvahs. For example, the mitzvah of wrapping oneself in a talus, right? There's not a mitzvah to put on a talus. There's a mitzvah to wrap oneself in a talus, as identified with the charge, accept upon yourself the king, eliciting for himself the encompassing light that enables the recipient to offer his soul to God when reciting the word echad in the Shema. This is, to unpack this line, I mean, this is quite a lot, but let me just, to the best of my understanding, we give ourselves, when you have this encompassing light, you are totally willing to give yourself over to this light. This is infinitude coming to me, wrapping me personally, all of me. Which part of you is not wrapped in the talus? Well, technically you could say your legs, your feet, okay, but which part of who I am is not encompassed, right? It's all of me. It encompasses all of me. I take all of me and give it over to God. The ultimate way to give ourselves over to God, at least, on one way of thinking about it, is that we give ourselves over to God with Mesirat Nefesh, giving our soul over to God. And when do we say that? When we recite the Echad in the Shema, we say God is one. Everything else is incorporated within God. And therefore, with this line, millions of Jewish people gave up their life. They gave up their life because they were unwilling to bend to the authority at hand. They were unwilling to kiss the cross. And so the sword kissed them. And the last words on their lip, the last word was echad. Because my whole being is incorporated within God. I am not here without that. And thus you want to make me do something else. I'm not here. And I happily give up my life. And as quoting Pirkei Avot, if there is no fear of God, the encompassing light elicited by the talus, elicited by the talus evokes fear, so then there's no chachma. So we say, it says in Pirkei Avot that if we don't have a fear of God, then you're not going to have the basic, simple understanding of God. Many times people want to understand God in a theological kind of a way. And what Pirkei Avot is telling us, you're not going to understand God theologically. This is not a theological academic discussion. This is a fear of God, meaning what do we mean by a fear of God? It means that God is here and I'm accountable for what I do. I can't do what I want, right? This is Reshit Chachma, the beginning of wisdom. Yirat Hashem is the fear of God, as it says in Pirkei Avot. So in this context, the intent of the term Chachma is not wisdom in the intellectual sense, but rather the self-nullification that enables one to serve as a receptor, as receives this divine light. Right? This is a very powerful idea, that the real Chachma is that I am receiving this information from above, and going back to what Ben Zion said, I make myself into an empty vessel, and that becomes the way that I can receive a connection with God. Afterwards, there's a higher level of fear that follows Chachma. As the Mishnah continues, if there's no Chachma, there's no fear. This refers to absolute bittul, which stems from one's closeness to God. All right, so this is let's understand what the this is. Let me tell you the statement in Pirkei Avot, and you'll tell me what the problem is. It says in Pirkei Avot, it says, Imein Yira, if you don't have Yira, you can't have Chachma, you can't have wisdom. Then it tells us that if you don't have wisdom, you can't have yira. Well, that sounds like a pickle. So where do you start? You understand the problem? If you don't have yira, you can't get chachma. And if you don't have chachma, you can't get yira. But where do you start? It's a pickle. You understand the problem? So Chassidus explains that we're talking about two different levels of yira. The first level of yira is the lower level of being aware of the presence of God in every aspect of our life, that God is here and I'm accountable to God. And so it's an accountability level of fear and understanding that everything that I do, there is a consequence. I heard to quote from a non-Chassidic scholar. I heard from Jordan Peterson. He was commenting on the verse that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. He said as a clinical therapist, he's basically he's a therapist. He does what is it called from Freud?
Psychotherapy.
Analytical.
Psychoanalysis.
Thank you. A psychoanalyst. Thank you. He's a psychoanalyst, and basically what he's come to see in his decades of practice is that you really can't get away with anything. All of the things that we think that we can get away with, there's a built-in accountability, and that's how he explains, I think, very beautifully the verse in Tehillim that Reshit Chachma, the beginning of wisdom, is the fear of God. So the first level of wisdom is for you. So you have this basic understanding that I'm accountable. Once you have this level of accountability, now you can perceive this wisdom of God to some degree. Now that wisdom can lead us to a higher level of fear, of awe of God, of realizing, wow, God is bringing about the entire universe at all times, and the entire universe at all times is really like nothing before him, and you are just totally blown away by the awesomeness of God. That would be an awe that maybe would cause someone to tremble. And that's a higher level. So it's what Zohar refers to as Yira Tata'a, the lower level of Yira. That's the gateway to Chachma. And Chachma is the gateway to Yira Ila'a, the higher level of fear. Again, meaning awe of God. For the characteristic of fear is that the closer one approaches, the more he is overcome with a feeling of awe. The characteristic of love, on the other hand, is that the farther one moves from the object of his love, the stronger the love grows. Because, you know what they say, familiarity breeds contempt. And what's the opposite of that? Is that distance creates, right? Or what, as my wife tells me sometimes, if you don't go away, how can I miss you? That when you have distance with someone that you love, your love is, the flames become even stronger. But in terms of fear, the closer you get to Hashem, the more you are in awe of God's presence. Accordingly, after the expression of bittul stemming from Chachma, when reciting the word Echad, you will be instilled with the awe that stems from absolute bittul. The vestige of this all-encompassing awe becomes invested in the encompassing light of the talus, inspiring him with the external fear that precedes Chachma. Okay, this is all a lot. Let's just read through that one more time. So you have the bittul. A person says Echad, realizing that everything is really just God. And coming from this level of the divine Chachma, I have an absolute awe. This is the higher level of awe that stems from absolute bittul, an absolute putting yourself aside. If you came face to face with something that was totally beyond all of existence, beyond any measure. God himself, if you would come face to face with God himself, what would be of you? We would have to put ourselves aside entirely. And a vestige of this feeling, of this awe, becomes invested in the encompassing light of the talus, inspiring him with at least by putting on the talus. So this is, I'm not sure how this works exactly, but somehow or another, the fear and awe, the deepest level of fear and awe of God that we have, somehow or another, a part of that, a small part, a vestige of that, becomes invested in the talus that we put on. So through putting on the talus, we actually can come to fear God. And I just want to answer for the ladies out there, because as we know, at least in the Orthodox tradition, the women are not putting on the talus. So anything that's being accomplished through the man part of the Jewish equation is accomplished equally for the women part of the Jewish equation. So there's no, the women would not be losing out on that, but they are getting that without themselves putting on the talus. They're getting it through the men putting on the talus. That's what the Arizal explains regarding tefillin, actually. The talus that one wears communicates the vestiges of the spiritual heights previously attained through the recitation of the Shema on previous occasions. So it has it has a memory. The talus has the memory of all of the Shemas recited within that talus, and when you put it on, it is you're going to be wrapped within your own experience of reciting the Shema that is contained within that talus. So now this is something very specific to the talus, but now getting back to the mitzvah at hand. The mitzvah at hand is loving our fellow Jews. So the Rebbe says, oh man, the talus, that is so awesome, that's so unbelievable. But all of this is only an explanation of the unity as generated by the soul's faculty of Chachma when one offers his soul to God, when reciting the word Echad, which represents the mystic secret of unity. So basically the talus becomes an extension of the Chachma that is expressed through reciting the Shema. And the fundamental dimension of this unity is brought about by the positive mitzvah of love your fellow, right? To love your fellow as yourself. For then you are entirely beautiful, my beloved, and there's no blemish in you. And you will be whole, perfect with your Lord, as explained above. So basically what the Rebbe is saying is that as awesome as talus and the mitzvah of Echad is ultimately about this unity, the unity of God. Well, how can we, one way is we can imagine God's unity in our mind when we recite the Shema, and that's going to affect the talus that we wear. Another way of engaging this unity, and much more profound, is simply to have the unity of the Jewish people. We bring about the direct unity of God in this lowest realm. Then we become whole and perfect with God your Lord. Furthermore, this positive mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, and especially the negative precept, do not hate, can be well explained from another perspective. But he doesn't go into that other perspective. So that's it. That's the mimer. It ends up on a bit of an esoteric note. There was this discourse was a combination of esoterica and practical and psychological. But as Hillel said, this mitzvah of don't do to others what you don't want done to yourself, this is the whole Torah. Discuss. Now we have to apply it in our life practically. So if we have any questions or comments, please, we have a few more minutes. But this is the conclusion of this mimer, of this discourse, and I will look for another discourse to start, God willing, next Wednesday.
I have a special story about a talus. May I share it with you?
Please.
You may be able to explain it a bit more, but before I became a Jew, I remember once, it was years before I became Jewish, that I used to like to put my collar up on my neck. I like the feeling of my neck. And I remember seeing a picture of myself. I had a very high collared coat. And I saw the high collared coat and I suddenly felt very happy. And I felt something about that was me, who I really am. And it puzzled me for years. And it was like very, it just swept over me and then went. And I felt very unhappy because I'd somehow found myself. I didn't know who that was. What was it all about, this feeling on my neck? When I converted, I got my first talus. I wrapped myself up and I felt it on my neck, the edge of it, and I just suddenly realized what that photo was all about.
That is
And
beautiful.
that feeling of being happy and being who I was, what came back all at once, and there I was,
That is astounding.
Extraordinary feeling. And when I wrap myself in the morning like that, I feel this healing. It's a healing power. I love it. So that was what I found, but it was wispy. I wasn't time for me yet to be able to experience and find that person.
That is amazing. So there we have it. So we had it in the discourse. We had the words describing the encompassing light, but you are telling the story of experiencing it.
Right.
And your neshama was calling out to you, huh?
Exactly.
Before it was officially transformed, it was calling out from within.
Yes, it's a feeling of being lost. Terrible feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Been seeing there's got to be. So in summation, since no one's speaking, I think in summation, what I found in life is that studying the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew is actually easier than applying it. And you think we put in literally hours and hours and really put in effort to understand this mitzvah so deeply, right? So God should grant each and every one of us success in applying it. A very first step is kind of, we have to have a sense of putting ourselves aside when one's own ego is strong. And this is, the Rebbe alluded to this at the very end of the Mimer, but he didn't go into it. He was going into the nation of Midian, and the whole idea of Midian represents strife, and at the source of strife, Kabbalah explains, is your ego. You know how sometimes you get into an opinion about something and you just can't you get entrenched, and now division ensues with different people. It's just ego. And so to fulfill the mitzvah, we need to let go of ourselves in the most amazing way. And we think, well, what's going to be of me if I let go of myself? What's going to become of me? Well, you might become like Reb Levi Yitzchok of Berditchev, a great lover of the Jewish people, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, like some other great men and women that we know who have enormous. They put themselves aside, their own self. They put aside. They're selfless, right? How close are the words selfish and selfless, right? How close are those words in English? But how the opposite end of the spectrum is, and we should all be blessed to be able to think about how to apply this mitzvah in the most practical way.
I believe the most difficult part is not to love someone, but forgiveness, because it's just, your love is not, it's not abstract. It's usually directed to a specific person, more or less. And because nobody is perfect, and some of us have really very bad inclinations, very bad behavior problems,
Right.
just to forgive and feel that it's a deserved feeling, that's something that is very difficult to give up.
Well, there was once a Jewish man who was the most powerful Jewish man in the world at that time. I won't give away his name right now. Some of you may recognize it. And he was walking along, and all of a sudden stood up this other Jewish fellow whose name was Shimi, the son of Gera, and started cursing this fellow. And cursing him and just, just with horrible.
David.
It was King David. King David was walking along. And when you speak like that to the king, you know what the punishment is. It's not very pleasant. And his first officer wanted to go and take care of the matter right away. What did King David say to his first officer? He said, "Who told Shimi to curse me if not God?" Wow. To realize that if somebody horribly offends me, and the Alter Rebbe goes and explains this at much greater length in Tanya, the Epistle 25, I think it is. And he says that if somebody comes and slaps you, you can be sure of one thing. God wanted you to be slapped. Imagine when something happens to us, instead of reacting and becoming a victim, how about if saying, you know what? God wanted this to happen. Now, I want to be clear. The person who did it is responsible. They're liable. You could bring a suit against them. You could, God will hold them responsible. But this idea, once you can swallow this pill, Anna, it's not so easy, right? It's an idea. Once you can understand this idea, forgiveness becomes much easier, because that person was merely the vehicle for God's plan.
I understand this part, but I'm always bothered because, I was a teacher for so many years, that usually a person who does it to you is continue to spread lies and really a bad behavior and hurting people around you. That's so if you will pass by and taking it as something that is part of your life, it's something that you need to understand and to deal with. But how would you deal it with someone who does the same to, God forbid, unprotected child, or someone who can be easily hurt and nobody could stand up for them?
You need to take care. When you're in a situation, say with a bully in a class, you have to take care of it. I'm not advocating the idea of, laissez-faire, or just, hands off and don't do anything about it. What you have to realize is that the bully is suffering as much as his victim. And I have to stop him and help him get better and help him deal with his situation better. But, I've been bullied in school. I assume everybody here has been bullied in school. I hope so, because if not, then you were the bully. What would you rather be? To have been the person bullied or to be the bully, right? And it's not okay, but we can't get angry even at the perpetrator. We can get even, we can have consequences, we can deal with him, but we can also deal with him in a loving way, knowing that this person is struggling and suffering so that they cannot manage themselves.
Yeah.
Right? And it shifts our whole way of taking care of this.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We can remember this.
That instead of being paralyzed with your anger and revenge, all other feelings, you find much more logical way to deal with it, which I agree completely.
Much more effective.
But it takes a long time.
It does. And it takes a lot of failure, right? It takes failing many times.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining, and I'll send, God willing, I hope I can get to something soon to send to Rabbi Smith for next Wednesday. It might only be on Monday because I'm out of town. My daughter's wedding, and we're celebrating in Sheva Brachas and all of these things. I'll get to it as soon as I can. But it might. Thank you.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
you.
Mazel
Our
tov to all.
next class
happy
will be on
Hanukkah.
Monday anyhow.
A very happy Hanukkah to everybody.
Yeah, good health.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.